On the night of December 5th, 1956, approximately 15 million Americans sat with their eyes glued to their televisions. They were watching NBC's 21.
Tonight here on 21, Herbert Stempel, our 29-year-old GI college student, can win $111,500, the highest amount of money ever to be won on television.
Stempel was the show's reigning champion, locked in a weeks-long one-on-one battle with the challenger, a young university instructor named Charles Van Doren. Each man faced a series of challenging questions.
Ulysses Grant was virtually placed under arrest for a brief time early in 1862. Who was the commanding general of the Union Army at that time?
Oh, yes, I know his name just as well as Halleck, General H.W. Halleck.
You're right, and you have 8 points. One of the most famous promoters in boxing history, the man who promoted the first $1 Million Gate, is largely responsible for prize fights being staged out of doors. Name this man.
Tex Rickard.
Right, you now have 16 points.
A critical moment came with a question for Stempel in the category of movies.
What motion picture won the Academy Award for 1955? You need some extra time to think about it?
I sure do.
To the millions watching at home, this looked like a man wrestling with a mental block.
I don't remember.
You want to take a guess at it?
He took his time before finally delivering his answer.
On the waterfront?
No, I'm sorry, the answer is Marty. Marty's.
Stempel went on to lose the game, and Charles Van Doren became the new national hero.
Then you win $20,000. Congratulations, Van Doren.
It was a perfect moment of television drama. But it was a lie. Herbert Stempel knew the answer was Marty. It was one of his favorite films. He didn't miss the question because he forgot. He missed it because one of the producers ordered him to get it wrong.
He said to me, "Tonight has been the night appointed for you to lose."
What the audience saw that night wasn't a contest of intellect. It was a scripted play, and Stempel wasn't the only actor. This was a scheme that ensnared producers, sponsors, and even the new champion himself, a man convinced that this fraud was actually a noble service to education. It was a scandal so massive it would force the United States Congress to rewrite the laws of broadcasting. This is the story of 21. In the 1950s, TV was still in its infancy, a wild west where networks were seeking a formula to keep eyeballs on the screen. They found their answer with quiz shows. The craze began with the $64,000 question.
Television was new then, and this was the most exciting thing that was part of it. It was unique to television. It was a new idea, a big money quiz.
When it aired, crime rates reportedly dropped because the entire country was inside watching.
On the night the $64,000 question was on, you could shoot a cannon down the street because nobody was on the street. Everybody was at home watching that show.
But it didn't just get viewers, it moved product. Revlon, the show's sponsor, saw their sales jump 54% in a single year. Suddenly, every advertiser wanted their own quiz show. Daytime TV was flooded with games like The Big Surprise and Tic-Tac-Doe, and by evening, primetime was dominated by big money spectacles. The American living room had become a casino, and the promise was intoxicating, that with enough knowledge, the common man could become rich overnight.
You're right for $8,000.
But the market was crowded. To stand out, you needed higher stakes. You needed tougher questions. You needed drama. Enter Jack Barry and Dan Enright, two ambitious producers who looked at the success of the $64,000 question and decided they didn't want to just match it, they wanted to beat it. They came up with 21. It was designed to be the hardest quiz show on television, a serious test for serious intellectuals. The rules were simple. 2 players, each placed in an isolation booth, raced to reach 21 points. They were given a category, then had to choose a point value from 1 to 11. The higher the number, the harder the question.
I'll shoot the works on this one. I'll try 11.
You go all the way. The most difficult question, 11 points.
A correct answer added to their score, but a wrong answer deducted the points. After 2 rounds, either player could choose to stop the game, but would not know how many points their opponent has. It was a high-risk game of intellectual chicken.
What a shock ending! They'll have to carry me out this time.
On September 12, 1956, the premiere episode of 21 aired on NBC. The game was initially played honestly. There was no coaching, no scripting, no manipulation.
And the first show of 21 was a dismal failure. It was just plain dull.
I'm sorry you don't score, and that puts you right back to 0. It's supposed to be a full show. It's turning out to be the greatest comedy show on the air.
The morning after the premiere, the show's sponsor, the makers of Geritol, delivered an ultimatum. They never wanted to see a repeat of what happened the previous night. Jack Barry and Dan Enright made a pivotal decision. As Enright later recalled, from that moment on, they decided to rig 21. They transformed the competitors into actors. Contestants were brought in for rehearsals, where they were fed the questions and answers. But the coaching went far beyond that. Dan Enright personally instructed contestants on the physical performance of thinking. They were taught when to pause, when to stutter, and how to show physical symptoms of anxiety. Enright would even turn off the air conditioning in the isolation booth, making the contestants sweaty and uncomfortable, adding to the high-stakes tension. The result was a program that appeared to be a test of intellectual endurance, but was in reality a scripted play. To create a compelling drama, 21 tried to create a foil. They found their antagonist in Herbert Stempel.
If either of you want to stop the game, you must tell me so right now. I'll stop. Then you win.
Stempel was a brilliant but socially awkward ex-GI from the Bronx, studying at the City College of New York. Enright recognized that Stempel lacked the charisma to be a long-term hero, so instead he was cast as the unbeatable but unlikable champion, a hurdle for a future hero to overcome. Enright meticulously engineered Stempel's public image. Stempel was instructed to wear a specific, ill-fitting, double-breasted blue suit that had belonged to his deceased father-in-law. He was ordered to get a Marine-type white wall haircut. He was fully aware of the rigging, but his compliance was secured through financial coercion and the promise of future opportunities. He later testified that remembering the answers was trivial, but the acting was exhausting. He was forced to suppress his natural ability to answer quickly, instead performing the pauses and stammers dictated by the producers. But by late 1956, Stempel's utility had run its course. Ratings were stabilizing, and the unlikable champion was becoming a liability. They needed a hero. Charles Van Doren was the antithesis of Herbert Stempel. An instructor at Columbia University, he came from a distinguished literary family. His father, a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. A charming man possessing an Ivy League pedigree, Van Doren represented the idealized American intellectual. The task of recruiting Van Doren into the fraud fell to producer Albert Friedman. The approach was not a transaction, but a seduction. When Van Doren expressed a desire to play the game honestly, Friedman told him it was impossible. Stempel, he argued, was unbeatable. Friedman appealed to Van Doren's vanity and his sense of mission as an educator. He argued that by appearing on the show and defeating Stempel, Van Doren would perform a great service to the intellectual life. Van Doren convinced himself that the lie was a small price to pay for the cultural good he was doing. To maximize the dramatic impact, the producers didn't want a simple victory, they wanted a war. They scripted a series of agonizing ties between Stempel and Van Doren over several weeks. A clash of titans was underway.
And the very, very best of luck to both of you.
The climax occurred on December 5, 1956, the night Herb Stempel purposely gave the wrong answer of the 1955 Best Picture winner. But what the cameras didn't show was the psychological games leading up to that moment. Enright had framed the Marty question not just as a loss, but as a humiliation. He pushed Stempel to fail on a topic he knew very well. When the moment came, Stempel later recalled considering a rebellion.
I knew I could have double-crossed them, but I did not.
For Van Doren, this launched a winning streak that captivated the nation. His run on 21 transformed him from an obscure academic into a national icon. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine, which praised the fascinating, suspense-taught spectacle of his highly trained mind at work. He went on to win $129,000, over $1 million today, and was quickly signed by NBC as a cultural correspondent. While Van Doren basked in adulation, Herbert Stempel stewed in resentment. The promises made to Stempel by Enright, jobs and further television appearances, never materialized.
When he didn't deliver on what he had promised, that's when I became a little angry.
Stempel decided to expose the truth. He took his story to the press, detailing the rigging and the Marty fix. But the newspapers were wary, accusing a national hero like Van Doren, and television broadcasters invited libel suits. Dan Enright, anticipating Stempel's defection, had prepared a defense. He secretly recorded a meeting where a desperate Stempel made statements that could be interpreted as extortion. Enright leaked the tape, successfully framing Stempel as a mentally unstable blackmailer. The allegations against 21 were suppressed, but the wall of silence finally cracked in August 1958. Not because of 21, but because of a different quiz show, Dotto. During an episode of the popular daytime program, a standby contestant found a notebook backstage belonging to one of the contestants on the show. The notebook contained the answers she had just used on stage. When this physical evidence of rigging on a similar show came to light, it lent immediate credibility to Herb Stempel's claims. A grand jury was convened, but the truth remained elusive as nearly 100 witnesses, including Charles Van Doren, perjured themselves, claiming there was no advance knowledge of the questions on 21. But the definitive proof was eventually revealed by James Snodgrass, an artist and 21 contestant. Snodgrass had also been coached, but he was suspicious of the producers. He decided to create an insurance policy against them. Before every appearance, Snodgrass sat down and wrote out the questions and answers he had been fed word for word. He sealed them in an envelope and sent them to himself via registered mail. That registered postmark became the smoking gun. It was the one thing the producers couldn't spin. With the evidence mounting, the scandal moved to the federal level. The House Subcommittee on Legislative Oversight began hearings in October 1959. The pressure on Charles Van Doren specifically became immense. Urged by NBC to testify and clear his name, he instead panicked. The weight of the lie he had carried for 3 years finally crushed him. Van Doren went into hiding, driving aimlessly through New England with his wife, moving from hotel to hotel, trying to outrun the inevitable. On November 2nd, 1959, he finally emerged and entered a packed caucus room. His testimony was the climax of the scandal. Reading from a prepared statement, Van Doren delivered a confession that was both apologetic and self-pitying. He confirmed everything: the scripts, the rehearsals, and the initial reluctance overcome by the argument about service to education. The fallout was immediate and profound. Charles Van Doren was fired by NBC and forced to resign from Columbia University. He spent the rest of his life in a quiet exile, working as an editor for Encyclopedia Britannica and writing under pseudonyms. When asked years later about the 21 scandal, Van Doren seemed to view the event as a positive in his life.
Everything good that has happened to me resulted from what happened to me 25 years ago.
So no bitterness and no anger.
None whatsoever.
Herbert Stempel finished his degree and worked for the New York City Department of Transportation. The quiz show scandal also triggered federal legislation. In 1960, Congress amended the Communications Act, making it a federal crime to rig a contest of intellectual knowledge on broadcast television. But the most significant change was structural. The scandal exposed the dangers of allowing a single sponsor, like Geritol, to have total control over a show's content. Networks moved toward the magazine concept of advertising, where multiple advertisers bought spots, but none had editorial control. The producers, Barry and Enright, were banished from US television. They quietly slipped away, yet their exile was ultimately temporary. In a remarkable second act, they returned in the 1970s with hits like The Joker's Wild. The 21 scandal was not just the end of an era for quiz shows. It taught the nation a harsh lesson: that the glowing box in their living room was not necessarily a window into reality, but a stage managed by those behind the curtain.